Hello, friends. My name is Ihor Havryshchak. This is traditionally the platform of Channel 24. Traditionally, we have Thursday evening, and our guest is a political scientist from the United States of America and ex-hero of the Azerbaijani government apparatus Ramiz Yunus. Mr. Yunus, hello.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. I am glad to see you in good health. Greetings to all our esteemed audience. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Mr. Yunus, there is a lot to talk to you during the week that has passed. This, of course, is Putin's visit to Mongolia. There is Zelensky's reaction. Also, Zelenskyy is urgently, as I understand it, flying to Germany for a meeting of Ramstein to talk about air defense weapons in the first place. And, of course, about the fact that NATO is seriously talking about the reality of shooting down missiles that fly from Russia to Ukraine and, as I understand it, to the rule of Poland, Romania and other countries. Let's start with the fact that Putin went to Mongolia. We have already discussed this issue more than once, but we did not talk about it with you. Take Putin, Mongolia, the visit, the International Criminal Court, how to react, how the countries that signed this Rome Statute reacted, and how to perceive the International Criminal Court, whose decision is not being implemented.
You are talking to talk to you. I have already spoken about it in the Ukrainian information field, so I drew attention to such a nuance that everyone is looking. For the most part, I understand at the emotional component for Ukrainian society in this topic, but I am still an expert. And I need to be guided in my expertise not by the emotional component that drives Ukrainian society, because you are guided by the norms of morality, conscience, justice, and all this takes place purely in human terms. But in purely international terms, I have in mind, from the point of view of this policy, all these geopolitical processes. Unfortunately, I emphasize, unfortunately, this is not the case. Because if we look closely at this world in which we have been living for the last 80 years, and I emphasize, for the last 80 years, this world is imperfect, primarily because international law is imperfect. And it was made like this by these key countries, the permanent members of the Security Council, the nuclear powers, these 5 countries. The United States, Russia, the former Soviet Union, Russia as a successor, France, Great Britain and China. And sir, everything that is within the competence of the United Nations, I emphasize, in this organization, you saw it with your own eyes, over the past 2.5 years, not a single resolution has passed through the Security Council, so to speak, in favor of Ukraine. There is a General Assembly resolution, yes, but they are, so to speak, just paper, it cannot be applied anywhere. This is a purely political declaration, which can also be good from the point of view of ideology, propaganda, politics, but from the point of view of substantive application, it has no significance. Plain paper. And what matters is the decision of the Security Council. In our country, these countries will never be allowed into the Security Council. Neither the United States will miss anything against its allies, nor Russia, nor China, nor Great Britain, including France. And so we see this mess, not only over the past 2.5 years, this mess has been regular for 80 years. And these countries dealt with these things on a regular basis. First of all, the Soviet Union and the United States of America. But I leave you this 18-year story, returning to the decision of this International Criminal Court. This is an International Criminal Court, many people tell me today, but the United States of America, they did not sign this Rome Statute. You are mistaken, the United States of America was in this Rome Statute before 2002, they simply withdrew from there. A simple question, if we ask why the United States withdrew from there then? What we will understand is that when this International Criminal Court suddenly begins to make claims against American citizens and friends who are loyal to America, the Americans did not like it. Naturally, the Americans withdrew. And now look at the permanent members of the Security Council. None of them accepts this Rome Statute, neither Russia, nor China, nor the United States. That is, they do not need it. Moreover, note that, how they have reacted to the decision of the International Criminal Court since its inception, depending on which decision is closer to them and which is not closer to them. And here is the latter. Now I give an example of the latter. When the decision of the International Criminal Court was made against the President of Russia and, as I understand it, the woman who dealt with these children, the abduction of children. A criminal court decision was applied to both of them. A warrant was issued, they applauded in America, and this was applauded throughout the collective West. That's right, there is a violation, it should be just like that. But America again welcomes this, and America has not been a party to this Rome Statute since 2002. That is, she must be somehow indifferent. That is, if I do not accept it, I do not react to it. But if you like this decision, you welcome it. Okay, it's your own business. Then the same decision comes with regard to the Prime Minister of Israel. Well, the same decision was made with regard to Hamas, including the leaders of Hamas. I leave the leaders of Hamas, this is a terrorist organization. What they did on October 7th is a real act of terrorism, and we have all said it 1,000 times. That is, it is not discussed. I want to put an examination, that is, my personal attitude to the state of Israel. It is no different from the personal attitude of Azerbaijan, the current leadership of Azerbaijan, in the mass of its Azerbaijani society, because Israel is a strategic partner of Azerbaijan. And despite this, I now want to give an examination. I leave my personal likes and dislikes. My attitude to Putin, to Biden, to Trump, to Netanyahu, to Xi Jinping, this is the wrong examination, if we are guided by sympathies and antipathies. I want you to understand how we should approach the examination and then assess Vladimir Putin's visit to Mongolia or some other country that could also sign the Rome Statute and why it does not comply with it. Based on this, and look at the reaction of the United States of America. The United States of America, when the International Criminal Court had just pronounced this with regard to the leader of Hamas, and put Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli Minister of Defense on the same level. The United States of America attacked this International Criminal Court, this prosecutor, all the judges, and threatened them with sanctions, and so on and so forth. That is, they razed it to the ground, this International Criminal Court. Doesn't Russia look at this International Court? Doesn't he look at this reaction? And Russia says, how to understand this? They are now accusing this International Criminal Court of all sins, and they say that it is biased, it is corrupt, it is so. Naturally, Russia will treat this international voice in the same way, and if the Americans can, why can't they? And when someone says, the Americans did not sign this Rome Statute, and Sir Benjamin Netanyahu came here he spoke, and in Congress before two houses. You see, you are now saying that the paper is signed or not signed, right? You proceed from this. So, it turns out, now let's move on. I have shown you this in this example, and now I will give other examples. I will always cite this in the Ukrainian information field, because it concerns my homeland, and my homeland is no worse or better than your homeland. For you, your homeland is better, for me my homeland. But we are friends, and let's be honest. We had the same war, even two, and we had the same genocide that is taking place on your territory. And we have our own Irpin, our own Bucha, our own Hostomel in several places. And the most famous was Koj Alek. And to this day, the Armenians are justifying the fact that there is not a single document of the International Criminal Court where it was written that Armenia is the aggressor. And nowhere is it written that there is a decision of the International Criminal Court, and that there is no warrant of the International Criminal Court against Robert Kacharian and Serge Sargsyan. Now what should I believe, dear Ihor? 10 million Azerbaijanis saw this with their own eyes. To believe the eyes of all the inhabitants. Imagine, you walk into a room, you see someone raping and killing someone. You saw it. You know that this was done by a specific person. Ivan Ivanovich, or Robert Kacharian, or someone else did it. You saw it, and then this person, by virtue of his connections, opportunity, through the International Criminal Court, that is, does not accept Azerbaijan's claims against him, and there is no paper against him. Now a simple question, is this person a criminal now or not? Should he be arrested or not? That is, in this regard, if there is no such document, this is the wrong approach. If someone has influence, and now, if the United States of America or some allies influence the International Criminal Court like this, no one will reckon with it. Therefore, it is in this situation that some claims are made against the switchman in the person of a country called Mongolia, which, look where it is geographically located, and see how seriously it has a serious impact on big international politics and in general on the war that Russia has started against you. What does this have to do with Mongolia? No. And if we look at the fact that 90% of Mongolia's energy sector is directly tied to Russia today, then what claims do you have against Mongolia? And now why haven't you made the same claims since 2014 to Europe, which is making this money with Russia in circumvention of sanctions? And there wasn't Ilovaisk there, and there was no Debaltseve. The same leaders sit in the Kremlin, but then there was no arrest warrant. It turns out that since 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, staged a massacre in the Donbas, killed tens of thousands of peaceful Ukrainians, it did not commit this aggression, it committed a crime, but the International Criminal Court did not have a decision on the warrant against the President of Russia, which means that they calmly communicated with him. Angela Merkel, the French leaders, Silvio Berlusconi, and everyone else. And in circumvention of the sanctions, even they sold, bypassing the embargo, weapons there. These are France, Germany and Austria. First of all, about 300 million euros, 200 something was there. And what is it? That is, there is blood up to the elbows, there is no warrant, business as usual, that is, everything is as it should be, they do it all. And after that, they make some claims to Mongolia, to any other country that has contact with Russia in one way or another. So, my dear, you did it yourself, you can, and others cannot. On what grounds? This hypocrisy, who just suffers from this? Switchman. First my Azerbaijan suffered, then Georgia suffered in 2008, then you suffered in 2014. And today someone is starting to make claims on this topic. Why did Mongolia do this? And what do you want from this Mongolia? I am not justifying this Mongolia, I am simply putting it on the same level as the USA, of which I am a citizen. Why should I defend the USA in this matter if they have acted wrongly, immorally? Not because they came out and entered this statute. No. Or you don't react in any way, you don't do anything, but you respect the decision of the International Criminal Court and support it with respect, then the whole world will stick to that. And if you approach this International Criminal Court on the principle of, this is a son of a bitch, but this is our son of a bitch and do not dare to touch him, then others can do the same. You can, but others cannot. In other words, I am saying this so that we do not get too hung up on this topic. I have no doubt that there are a huge number of countries on the planet where the President of Russia will fly, which have signed the Rome Statute, and no one will arrest him. By doing so, he once again wants to demonstrate that no one will arrest him. This is a slap in the face to the International Criminal Court, and it is a slap in the face to the entire system of institutions created in the West, first of all, because it was created at the initiative of the United States and Western institutions, but because you yourselves did it this way. You have lowered them, and now you want these autocracies, with whom you, democracies, have done trillions of business. Now you demand that they be brought to order. They should have been called to order when it began in 2008. They should have been called to order when 30 years ago 4 UN Security Council resolutions regarding the occupation of Karabakh and 7 regions around Karabakh, Azerbaijani lands by Armenia and which was supported by Russia and the same Iran. It was necessary to react then. It was necessary to implement these UN resolutions. 4 Security Council resolutions. No one implemented them. Who opposed it? France, the USA, permanent members of the Security Council. Were there any opportunities in Azerbaijan? There were no opportunities. We drew conclusions. And now, in the Second Karabakh War, we have the support of the Security Council. Including, and they made it so that all those who were sitting there either kept silent or did not interfere. Well, in any case, there was no veto there. There were no anti-Azerbaijani resolutions. They left us alone. Moreover, it is even better that at that time Donald Trump was president, who did not care about both Armenians and Azerbaijanis. He dealt with China, Saudi Arabia, the European Union, NATO, and other problems. He had no time for us. And we solved our problem. And now we have solved our problem, we are starting to drink blood again. And all these international institutions that are engaged in corruption, hypocrisy, bribery, double and triple standards. They will teach us that where there is international law, where international law is not. International law today clearly says that Crimea and Donbas are Ukraine. That's all. This should have been done in 2014, to react. Abkhazia is the Shinvali region, it is Georgia. It should have been done in August 2008. And what did you do? You made a deal behind Georgia's back, sold Saakashvili, went to reset this damn thing. You betrayed Ukraine in 2014 with this Crimea, with this Donbas. Even now, for 2.5 years, you were going to betray them. You betrayed Azerbaijan 30 years ago. You wanted to betray Azerbaijan now, but thank God, Azerbaijan is a different country. Azerbaijan has allies. Note, they have nothing to do with anyone. Turkey is a member of NATO, but it supported Azerbaijan not as a member of NATO, but as a fraternal country. Moreover, 30 years ago, this Turkey did not support us either. Israel also supported us, and Pakistan. There are no countries of the post-Soviet space, including Ukraine. Not a single country in the post-Soviet space stood with us. For the most part, everyone supported the Armenians. Armenian centricity was present in the post-Soviet space, in Europe, and in the United States. We see this, and that's why I react so calmly to this, because I understand perfectly well why the president of Russia went to Mongolia, and why Mongolia reacted this way. And this should not be viewed through the prism of the fact that it somehow affected Ukraine. This applies directly to the West, Western institutions. And note that you reacted in Ukraine even at the level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, and no one said a word on this topic in the West. From respectable politicians at such a respectable level, ask yourself, who needs this more, you or them? This is a slap in the face for them. You did not create this international criminal court and you did not write this warrant. And how do they react to this? Therefore, this is all that I wanted to say on the topic of the Russian president's visit to Mongolia.
Thank you, dear Mr. Yunus. I would also like to ask you about what is going on now. This is the Eastern Economic Forum, where Putin spoke today, and he called the seizure of Donbas the primary goal of the war. How does this happen? Explain to me, Mr. Yunus, that there is an entrance to your sovereign land, to the Kursk region, we say, but all the same, you initially set the goal, this is the seizure of someone else's territory, and as I understand it, we will talk about your own, we will think about it later.
The answer to your question is very simple. We have already voiced it several times in your programs regularly, especially from the very beginning, when I said that the wrong strategy cannot be changed in any way or cannot become successful as a result of some tactical actions. Because the strategy was blitzkrieg. And under this strategy, they did what they did. And when this blitzkrieg failed, they began to change this tactic. And as a result, they stopped at the occupation of Donbas completely, that is, within the territorial territory that was at the time of 1991. And they began to throw all their strength there. Throwing there, and at the same time, of course, they wanted to seize a certain amount of other territory, hoping that they would succeed. They also failed, by and large. Both the Kyiv region is your success, and the Kherson region is your success, despite the fact that they wrote something on paper in their constitution. And so today they understand that sooner or later this war will have to come to some denominator. They expect that it will be such a situation, which they will be able to sell to their society. Because 500,000 have already died, they say. This is according to unverified data. Again, the Americans say that at least 500,000 died there only from Russia. And we will have to answer for this. We will have to explain to Russian society that as a result of this we have done this, that. And therefore, this is voiced so that the Russians understand that there is allegedly little left, and that's it. After that we will stop it all. And the topic of the Kursk region, mind you, is stubbornly hushed up in the Russian information field. And not only is it hushed up, the General Staff of the Ministry of Defense does not deal with this topic at all. This topic is supervised by the FSB and special services. And the question arises, why does this happen? Why do they do this? And here, of course, there are a lot of possible options, so to speak. And one of the options is the one that I have already voiced several times. I even remember it in Karabakh. I voiced it at an international conference in Shusha. I told the Russians, quite famous Russians. But I will not name them, you know them all on TV. You see them, they were there. And that's how big the round pillar was. And they asked me my opinion about this war. How do you see the way out? I say, you are at a dead end. You're caught because of your strategy, you're in a hopeless situation. You don't know how to get out of this war. Because any way out of this war hits you. This is a minus sign for you. You do not have victory in this war, in any of the options. You have the opportunity to take a step back, because you control the situation inside the country, you have an authoritarian regime, you have cleaned up everything there, You have controlled this country for 25 years, and you will not have any problems inside the country in order to give them a specific topic and present it as a victory. Your success. You can always do all this, so you need to take a step back. Ukraine does not have this opportunity. Ukraine is standing over the abyss, because the war is taking place on its territory, nowhere else, that is, and Ukraine cannot stop, as you say, in terms of the fact that let's stop today with this, so to speak, real number. Then the question arises, why did they fight for 2.5 years? Therefore, Ukraine will never agree to this, and you understand perfectly well that Ukraine will never agree to this. So, you must take a step back so that Ukraine takes this step back. They ask me, what step back? And this is up to you. But this is the step backwards that will strengthen Ukraine's negotiating position. You have no other options. Ukraine simply will not agree to this. Either you do it voluntarily, or Ukraine will do it by force. And the West will support in this. This was before the Kursk operation. It was a conference a month and a half ago. And after a while, the Kursk operation began. That is, logically, if I am a simple modest expert, I express this in a conversation. This is analytics, it can be seen with the naked eye. When you see this whole situation, follow it carefully, and there are no fools there. Think tanks are working there, and they probably calculate all these options, and they understand that today Ukraine can do something like this. And Ukraine did it, and Ukraine did it, and Ukraine did it quite strongly, unexpectedly, well, together with its allies. Whatever they say, it is coordinated with the United States of America. You can be sure that it will be strengthened. And your president specifically said today that we did not come there to seize this territory. We do not need it, but we will hold it just as long as we need to strengthen our positions. And I think it will not end in the Kursk region alone, because there is no other way to force them to take a step back. Now, if you have captured a territory, you do not return, then we are taking over the territory, and we do not return. If you want us to return it, then you return it. It means that there is a topic for negotiations. Another thing, usually, you always need to take more of something, so that later there is an element of bargaining in this situation. Therefore, as I understand it, Ukraine will strengthen this direction, and the Russians will strengthen the Donbas direction. And the war this year will be very fierce, and it will continue very strongly. And this is understood in the West, and, judging by the latest statements, judging by the brutality that we saw in Poltava and Lviv, this suggests that in the near future you should see an increase in concrete support from both the United States of America and its NATO allies.
Yes, Mr. Yunus, it is unusual in our conversation. We will only now begin to recall the United States and what is happening there, but in the spirit of what was said in Russia. How much attention should be paid to Putin's statement that he allegedly supports Kamala Harris in the elections in the United States of America? And I have a question. Why does he talk about it? Why does he remember it?
In the East, we have such a moment at weddings. I was once at a wedding, I heard such a phrase. The father says to his son, he says, listen carefully to your wife, and then after a pause. And then do everything the other way around. Now, if today the president of Russia or someone from Russia is so confidently saying something about one of the candidates, then be sure, it means that he will support his opponent. That's all. What is necessary to agree on this topic? Why talk about this topic at all? Because Attorney General Eric Gardner spoke in America yesterday. The news conference was, and he spoke and openly repeated all the theses that have been voiced since 2016. For 8 years now, this topic has been there, Russia's interference in the presidential campaign. And everyone understands that Moscow's sympathy is on whose side. This is no secret to anyone. You need to watch Russian television, what is happening there. And there I did not hear anything that they would support either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. That is, there is no such thing there at all a priori. It turns out that the only person in Russia who supports Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is the president of Russia, and everyone else is against, everyone else supports Trump. Therefore, these are figures of speech. It is just to say that I am not me, and the house is not mine. So everything that the Kremlin says about such an obvious one, take it exactly the opposite. As for the topic of the American presidential election, of course, they have reached the finish line, and they in one way or another affect everything that happens in the world, not only here in the United States, but also in the world, and, of course, first of all, the Russian-Ukrainian war, the Middle East war between Hamas and Israel. In general, to the South Caucasus, to Iranian-Israeli relations, to China-Taiwan relations, and therefore the entire infrastructure, the entire world paradigm will change. All this is what I told you, the law of force has come to the fore. And, of course, in this situation, it is very important to understand what kind of leaders will be in the White House today, and how they see the future of the planet, and the role of the United States in this matter. And, of course, everyone today is trying to wait. For example, Netanyahu is holding on so that Trump comes to power. Moscow is counting in the same way, by and large, on the fact that the Democrats will leave, and the Republicans will come to power. In Armenia, they are waiting for a change of power in the same way. In Azerbaijan, they are waiting so that the Armenians are not offended, and in Azerbaijan they are waiting. Everyone has their own interests, you see, and in Europe they are waiting, and in the European Union, of course, and in NATO they are waiting. There are supporters of Trump, but there are fewer of them. There are supporters of the Democrats, there are more of them there. You see what is coming. Where is the right, where is the left? The right is Trump's supporters, the left is the Democrats' supporters. And in all other areas, the same is happening. Populism is the same as it was. And the leaders of this populism, they are visible here, they are visible in Europe. Populists, mind you, have recently manifested themselves in France, recently in Germany. A populist has achieved success, for the first time since Nazi Germany. There are populists in Hungary, populists in Slovakia, populists in many places. But this does not mean that it will always be so. It is just clear that the time of technocrats is coming, but it is coming hard, slowly. And populists, they are very strong, especially when they have a lot of money, huge financial resources. If half of the population in the United States of America is infected with populism, this does not mean that the other half of the population is behaving correctly, because America was strong with regionalists. In my views on life, I am a conservative person, but I am a liberal conservative. I have moments that I welcome. I am for traditional values, family values. First of all, it means that the conservatism of the Republicans is closer to me. But I am in favor of women's freedom in matters such as abortion. This is unequivocal. This means that I adhere to the position of my neighbor here. Because this woman has to decide for herself how to deal with her health. And no one has the right to tell her. You see, this is completely wrong. Again, these are different, and these two parties have different positions in this situation. Just like on many other issues that differ in these two parties, in these two directions. But look, they happen all over the world. Here I am against globalization. I am against globalization, because what is good, for example, in Belgium, in Luxembourg, in Holland, it does not fit into Turkey or my native Azerbaijan at all. That's why, for example, I sit and think that Azerbaijan does not need the European Union categorically. And why go to the European Union if you start pushing us those values that do not fit into Azerbaijani society? But Azerbaijan, for Azerbaijan, number one, maybe should be a market. This is the European Union, a very profitable market. And we trade with them. That is, you can trade, you can do business, but you don't have to get involved in some political institutions, as a result of which you will have to change yourself. That is, if you like classical music, if you like to dress in a suit, in a tie, if you don't like this, that, and you are forced, you go into this house, and there are such rules, then you don't need to go into this house. And how should we communicate? I live here in America. Note, I have a representative of non-traditional orientation living downstairs. People from Pakistan, from another Muslim country, live on the playground with me. And it's quite comfortable, everything is fine, and I'm a socialite, I'm in a suit and tie, and we seem to live normally, because America, it seems, has certain laws here. The main thing is that I don't interfere with him. The main thing is that he does not interfere with me. I do not interfere in his family affairs, he does not interfere in my family affairs. That's the type, all right. I am a centrist by nature, you know, in this regard. Therefore, The best of the developing countries of the developing West certainly need this, especially in the field of market economy, especially in the field of political institutions, which in one way or another strengthen society, its civil status, the civil sector of society, the media and everything else, of course, strengthen human life, including in economic terms. That's fine, of course, but if it affects in some way that you have to, as I put it, lose your own face, and you have to give up your identity in that regard, I'm of course categorically against such moments. I see that these processes are taking place all over the world today, and they are taking place in Europe. First of all, they are happening here in the United States of America. And in the same way, for example, America today is divided into two parts. There are those who support white America, they are all for Trump, the so-called rednecks. And there are those who support immigration, and they seem to be around the Democrats. And what happened? Can't we be together? Can't you go somewhere in between? And what can white people do? Black people can't. What black people can do, white people can't. And what about a representative of an Asian territory, a representative of other faiths? Or are we not a religious country like in Iran? There can be Muslim believers, Christian believers, and Jewish believers. There can be an atheist, there can be a Buddhist. Who cares? And such a person, if it is written according to the Constitution, can be the president of this country, a congressman, a senator. This was the strength of America. That's what they came up with in America, the New World. Everyone fled here from Europe, white people, then they brought slaves here. But now you've given everything to these slaves. You've given them all the rights. Their representative has even become president here. Well, keep this America. The strength of America is in the same. This is a country of immigrants, and what are you doing? You're going into the wrong field, you know. Therefore, this crisis is happening here. A crisis in Europe is happening, again, this globalization, when they open the borders, and then the Italian already says, you should not be Italian, the French should not be French, the German should not be German, and the British should not be British. Therefore, the British, you see, left the European Union. This Brexit, again, there were economic reasons, but there were also reasons that I am voicing. And half of the UK population supported it. And populists also play this, because this is the weak link in this imperfect system, you see. This is the system of globalization, and populists are playing on this. Populists are playing on this in China, in Russia, and in all other countries that are geographically far from the same Western civilization, in this regard. And with regard to the International Criminal Court, regarding your war, so when we say why for them your war is not their war, not only for them. In the post-Soviet space, your war for many countries is not their war, because each of these countries has its own problem, and each country must solve its own problem. Who will solve the problem of Azerbaijan, except Azerbaijan? No one. You see, no one. No one stood up for Azerbaijan, except for the countries I have mentioned. And everyone else was dealing with their own problem. But if there had been a perfect international institution, if the United Nations had worked, it means that Azerbaijan would not have had these problems 30 years ago. Ukraine would not have had this problem in 2014, Georgia would not have had it in 2008, Transnistria would not have existed 30 years ago, I mean, Moldova. There would be no such problems, but this world is imperfect. And what to do in a single country? And therefore, when something like this happens in the most important country, which is also not perfect, it is the main one on the planet, and everyone looks at the presidential election. I'm telling you, America is in crisis, America is in the deepest crisis. America is polarized, but America will get out of it. There will be no problems in America. America will not fall apart, as they want to present it in China, in Russia or elsewhere. America has been through this 1,000 times. The dollar is printed here. America has an American debt of 30 trillion. But America is solvent. It pays off its debts calmly and it can increase its debt regularly and nothing will happen to America. And what will happen to other countries in this situation? Remember the pandemic, who came out best in this situation? America, because America had all these opportunities. Militarily, America is the strongest country and America has the largest GDP, with 25% and 20% for China. Therefore, when we understand all this, and just a crisis, I live here in America, I understand that this crisis will not affect my life personally. And I'm an ordinary average American. Rich people, who are much richer than me, will not be affected by them. This will affect the poor a little, yes. There is some kind of system here, which, perhaps, protects them. Maybe it doesn't protect you so well, but it's much better to protect than somewhere in China, or in Russia, or somewhere in Africa, or somewhere in Central Asia. Unambiguously, and in many European countries, it may also be better here. But, in any case, America, let's say, is not the Scandinavian countries. There is a huge territory here. Therefore, it is all important to understand all this. Living here, I understand this very well. And, unfortunately, many in Ukraine do not fully understand how the Americans, by and large, react differently to this war. And the fact that today the Americans are involved in this war by 5% is, first of all, a huge success of the Ukrainian people, your heroism. I remind you that 80 years ago, Americans did not want to get involved in World War II at all. Churchill did this, Roosevelt did not want to do it at all. You have to understand, according to the mentality of America, there is even a doctrine, an agreement that the former president signed with Europe. Everything that is beyond the Atlantic Ocean does not concern America. Everything from this side does not concern Europe. And until World War II, they adhered to this rule. America did not interfere there, and they did not interfere here. They specifically signed such an agreement at one time, about 100 years ago. And they violated it for the first time during World War II. And when Churchill came, he put the whole of Washington, the whole establishment, on its ears here. Since then, America has been interfering, and now, for example, the policy of the same Donald Trump is precisely in this, that is, the policy of isolationism, as they say. That is, America is above all. We don't care about the European Union, we don't care about NATO, we don't care about all the problems that exist on the planet, only through the prism of whether it is beneficial to us or not. We don't want to be the world's policemen. This is Trump's policy, I want you to understand. And the policy of the Democrats is a step forward, 2 steps back. No escalation, everything they do. This is the same criminal policy. That is, neither this policy nor the other policy is worthy of America. Worthy of America was the policy pursued by the same Ronald Reagan. Not because he is a Republican, because in the Republican Party, the Reaganists do not accept the policy of the same Donald Trump. They just have corporate interests. They are fighting for power today, so they have united in this regard. A huge number of Reaganists, one of them was the late John McCain. I had the good fortune to communicate with this man several times in my life. One of the most resilient people. It's a pity that it doesn't exist. When he was a candidate with Barack Obama, the last time I went to the polls was then and voted for him. But, unfortunately, today in America such politicians, I mean in the establishment, and in those who claim power, are not even close to point blank, and there are none in Europe. Maybe Ursula von der Leyen began to look a little more or less like Margaret Thatcher. Let's see what she will do in her second term and, first of all, regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war. In the first cadence, she behaved with dignity.
Mr. Yunus, I would also like to ask you about the fact that tomorrow there will be a meeting of Ramstein, and Der Spiegel says that Zelenskyy will personally appear at the meeting. As I understand it, this will be a serious conviction in the supply of air defense weapons. And here, to arms, I would like to ask you about the statements of Kirby and NATO. First of all, Kirby, the White House National Security Advisor, says that allegedly ATACMS, which are hit at 300 kilometers, will not help Ukraine much, because Moscow has already taken all its aircraft from the airfields. But I have a question, why delay this issue for so long to allow Russia to escape?
всю свою авиацию с аэродромов, но у меня вопрос, а зачем так долго тянуть с этим вопросом, чтобы давать возможность убежать России?